And this is a conversation, of course, that we hear so often from our followers is, oh my goodness, I've got this menopause belly. How do I get rid of it? And one of the questions from one of our listeners was this, and I'm going to direct this to you, Kim, how to find the right amount of exercise that will get rid of the increasing menopause belly. My workout sessions are always over an hour, generally an hour and 30, but is that too much in my 50s?
Yeah, and I think I love this question because it kind of sums up so many of the concerns and perhaps the misinformation that we are seeing from our members out there. But firstly, just to say, I can really empathize with this member of our community. So many women feel this. And I think there is such a story here about how what we did before in our earlier decades just ceases to work. And it can be so frustrating. And our bodies are changing in ways we don't have any control over. So I think it's just to give this lady some grace and to say thank you for raising this question, because it's a really difficult place to be. But there are very many elements to this question. It'd be super just to dive into. So firstly, it's really important to say that when it comes to losing body fat, which is essentially what this question is kind of centering on, is that comes from a consistent calorie deficit, not in its entirety from the amount in which you exercise. I do caveat that with exercise is important. It absolutely contributes to fat loss. But if we're really going to dial in that specificity, you need to be in a consistent calorie deficit. So I think that's really important if we're talking about body fat at any age. Menopause, it's kind of irrespective. We know that the science shows us that menopause in itself does not encourage us to gain weight from a biological perspective. But the symptoms and the fact that the drop in estrogen means our fat is redistributed often to our belly makes us feel like we're gaining a lot of weight through menopause. But actually, it tends to be the symptoms, the fatigue, the bone soreness, the joints. Perhaps you might have headaches, not sleeping. They can all make us move less
That's
inclined
right.
to exercise, perhaps more
Mhm.
inclined to reach for the highly palatable foods. So staying in that calorie deficit can be really, really hard. But essentially, that's what this lady needs to consider, less so the exercise, more the nutrition and understanding her calories. That's really useful. And the only other part I'd like to touch on here is that she is exercising a lot. Now, for some people, this can actually be absolutely fine. If you're accustomed to longer sessions and you've been doing that for a while and your recovery is still good, it's
Right.
kind of okay to be in that space. But I'd always caution upon doing more thinking you're going to get more, because actually, again, a lot of the research shows us that you can really have a relatively minimum amount of exercise to equate great health benefits. So whereas we might be talking here if she's doing multiple sessions of 1.5 hours a week, perhaps that should maybe mean like 3 or 4 sessions of 45 minutes a week, and she'd probably gain just as many benefits from a health perspective
That's right.
and
Yeah.
give herself back a whole load of time as well.
Yeah.
So I feel like this question has loads in it. But Tracy, what do you think about where this lady's at?
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, you yourself have experienced this, right? Sort of the diminishing returns as you add more and more and more and more exercise on. And one of the things that that can lead to is burnout. It can lead to injury, and then you're behind the eight ball, right? If that's the case. So I love your advice, Kim. I totally agree and think that it all comes down to that calorie deficit and how accurate you are. I think people guess, they don't track, and I understand that tracking's not for everyone. Sometimes people have had disordered eating and they don't want to go back to that. But for precision, I've had a couple coaching calls, one-to-one calls this week, and I asked the women, do you track your food like accurately? And they didn't, and they weren't losing weight. And I'm like, it's just, I mean, that would be the place to start. That's what I would suggest if it's not contraindicated for you and your psychology. But yeah, I think accuracy is really key. And they even did a study with women to see how accurate people were in their tracking. And as women got older, I think in the age 50, 60, 70, in there, their tracking became less and less accurate, right? The 20, 30-year-olds were like dialed in. And then we just kind of popped, in Costco, just all of the samples in our mouth and didn't track those or extra sips or licks or drinks and so if someone were following you and looking at all of the things that you consumed and you're like, oh, I am in a calorie deficit. I don't know why I'm losing weight. You're not. You're not in a calorie deficit. That's why you're not losing weight. Generally, I mean, the majority of the time, right? I mean, there could be some diseases that cause, but very seldom is that the case. It's just that you haven't been tracking accurately. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's so true. I know a lot of the one-to-one calls I've also had have really kind of displayed that. And it's so interesting because when I have our one-to-one clients, start tracking, for those of you, as you say, where it's appropriate to do so, it's so eye-opening for them, which I feel is that there can be some shame around that, I think, because sometimes, I meet women who are like, but I eat so healthily, I'm sure I must be in a deficit, but I just can't lose weight. And then it's almost like you're calling their bluff because like, well, let's track it. And then it comes back with being considerably more calories than they thought. But there's no shame. It should be empowering that we then have this knowledge, because then we can work with them to actually tweak their diary and their diet down a little bit. And actually it's often easier to get to the place of being in deficit than we think it is. But without that knowledge, you just can't guess, as you say. And all the research shows us that we as human beings always underestimate what we're eating completely. As
Oh,
you say,
totally.
the tidbits, the snacks, the morsels off the plate. When also, as we're aging, and quite often, a lot of our women are already relatively lean, they want to lose some more weight, maybe it's the last 10, 15 pounds. Your deficit has to be so spot on to affect any kind of difference that it takes almost nothing to push you out of it.
That's
So
true.
again, the accuracy with the tracking, the understanding what's going into your body is absolutely vital, so we can get the women the results they want, because in the end, why are we wasting our time otherwise?
Yeah.
Wonderful.